Chair Davis, we are good to go.
We are now back in open session. We appreciate your patience while we dealt with some matters in closed session, and we'll now proceed to our committee work and begin with the Business Operations Committee led by Vice Chair Duncan. Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. On behalf of Todd Chastain, we represent the Business Operations Committee. On behalf of the board, we have 3 actions on first reading today. I know we're tight on time and it's 10:31 and we're supposed to be finished by now. So we will try to do this as expeditiously as we can, but some of these matters are important, and so we will solicit any comments certainly. The first one is approval of contracts over $500,000. We approved this contract with with SAS on EVOS at our last meeting, but there's been a number of modifications made to the contract. I think Tom Tomberlin's on the line, and I understand based on his outstanding performance at our last meeting that he can summarize these changes in less than 30 seconds, and any questions can then be asked.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. I will try. So the change in the contract, these are relatively minor changes. There was a section in Article 1 of that contract that set the expiration of the contract at June 30th, 2022, and the attorneys felt like that might be construed as expiring the entire overall SAS contract. So we removed that language. In addition, number 5 that you see there is an acknowledgement of the work of the 1920 school year. We did not calculate growth. We did not seek reimbursement from SAS for that lack of growth calculation. And this, we are using some funds from that school year, from that contract, along with this $1 million to conduct this COVID impact study. So we wanted that documented in the contract so the board knew where that money went and the public knew where that money went. And that it is being used in this, in addition to this $1 million contract.
Dr. Tomlin, thank you very much for that very succinct summary. And importantly, relating the use of the beneficial use of the dollars that were not used last year. Are there any questions or comments on this item? Not hearing any, let's go on to BizOp item number 2. Dr. Maher and Dr. Townsend have this item. You recall we did discuss this at our last meeting, and this involves the ARP ESSER State Plan template, which is an application that needs to be sent in to the federal government, and we have a June 21st deadline. As you may recall, our public comment period ran out on June 18th. At the time of our meeting, there were only 2 public comments that had been received at that point. There have now been 230. One of the things that occurred is an email went out shortly after our meeting regarding this matter, which prompted a very large number of emails. And you may see in the materials, there's a breakdown. 88% of the emails address critical race theory. It's important to note that critical race theory is not mentioned at all in the ARP ESSER State Plan template that documented for you for consideration. But obviously, it's a topic that is of some importance to our citizens. So even without it being in the template, sometimes people take an opportunity to comment, and it appears that occurred with some of the comments that have come in since our last meeting. I have received a few comments from board members and I have a couple as well about this document. So Dr. Maher, you may want to make a short presentation. In the interest of time, I'm then going to try to summarize the comments that I'm familiar with or aware of and go through those as quickly as we can on this document, so some modifications can be at least considered if appropriate as it is being finalized. So Dr. Maher and Dr. Townsend, let me stop and let y'all at this point comment about where we are.
Okay, we're happy to jump in. As you know, and I guess in the essence of time, I won't repeat what we've been discussing all along. 90% of the funds go out to the actual school districts. 10% of those funds are reserved for state level activities, including 0.5% for administration. This application, again, is required for us to receive the remaining portion of our funds. At this point, we have 2/3 of the total allocation in-house. Upon completion of the application, we will be able to receive the remaining 1/3 of our total statewide state allocation. In terms of the application, it is split into several sections that are outlined on the next slide. All of the actual application is included in your board materials. And what I will tell you is that we did provide an opportunity for feedback to be given on the application. And since the time of actually submitting our documents for posting, we are now up to 280 comments. And so we had a variety of comments. You will see on the following slides that actually what we've done is outline the nature of those particular comments. And so a technical correction, asking for greater levels of support. There were comments that asked questions. We had quite a few that asked us to reject this funding. We were solicited by software developers and others who wanted to sell specific products. And then the last portions, the last 3 comments, they were people writing in opposition to the plan. A great number of those, again, as you said, Vice Chair Duncan, were about the rejection of critical race theory. And that does not appear in this plan whatsoever. And so at this point, what do we have to do to continue to move forward? We will have to make any amendments as required by the board. And then the last thing that is required for us to get our funding is to actually post and regularly update the number of schools that are in plans A, B, or C. And so that will have to be on our website. And then Dr. Marr is going to be having a series of feedback sessions to further expand our state plan. We see this as a template or as a framework to really get us started on the hard work that will take place over the next few years. And so this gives us a real good jumping off point, or it gives his office a really good jumping off point to make sure that we are implementing things to really move the needle on student achievement. And so, Vice Chair Duncan, I turn it back to you for any questions or comments that you have at this time.
Thank you very much. And I am going to try to run through quickly some comments that have just generally been received. A couple of these are mine, a couple others are from other sources and from the board, and just want to get these out there as quickly as I can in light of the interest of time. On page 5 of the actual report, there's reference being made to a dashboard that's being created with respect to this ESSER plan. And the question's been raised, can we draft this in such a way that there's a number of dashboards that are being talked about right now. Obviously, one's being developed in connection with Leandro, one's being developed here. The board's cognizant of the importance of these dashboards, and there's interest in seeing that we consolidate and don't use additional resources for duplicative dashboards and make these dashboards as efficient and thorough as possible. And so the thought comment is just to look at that so we carefully coordinate with already existing dashboards, including others that are in development or near completion of development, including the state board one that was recently subject of discussion before the board. So I don't know that changes the report, but it does. It's an important focus that we're efficient in use of our resources for creating these dashboards. On page 6, the question has been raised, page 6 of the report, that we talk about here North Carolina's priorities are derived from the State Board of Education strategic goals and from Operation Polaris goals, and they're listed 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the thought's been expressed by board members that the things are in both of these two, 1, 2, 3 of the State Board strategic goals and 1, 2, 3, 4 of Operation Polaris, have all been supported by the state board, and I believe all have been supported by the superintendent, that it's a more united front. As an agency as a whole, that is both the state board and DPI. If we can look at a way of bringing these goals together as opposed to separating them as if there's some disparate thought process that does not exist between the department and the board, that would be more effective and present a stronger united front or picture. So we'd ask that be looked at in terms of revisions before submission. On page 8 of the report, there's a number of data points listed. It's very, very good page, very thorough set of thoughts, but a couple of additional thoughts have come up as part of the review of this. The first one is, if we're looking at the kinds of data we're talking about, we should be also looking at the discipline data, that is disparate discipline data that's out there. You may have intended that in some way to be in here, but it's not clear. So the board members raised that. In addition to that, there's a youth risk behavior survey that's been important, and the board has found that survey very informative, I think, and we've had some discussion about it. It's been reported on from our safety app, and so the suggestion is that there also be an effort to include data, and that data points from there be included as part of the summary. So on page 9 of the report, near the bottom, there's discussion about SB State Board and the department strategically investing in a variety of diagnostic assessments beginning in the fall of 2021. And I think board members are, obviously we have made an investment, a significant investment in the recent passage of the contract for Read to Achieve. And the board members recognize that's not the only assessment that's needed. That's a very important one. But I think better clarity about what assessments we're talking about here is important. And so when it says a variety of diagnostic assessments from the board standpoint, I think members want to know what we're talking about, and that the assessments are directed, pointed, that there's just as much as we have to do, the assessments are an important part of the process. And at the same time, we need to show discipline to use the assessments that are effective in moving children forward, which I know is your thought process, but a little better understanding of that and set out in the report, it's been commented, would be very beneficial, because we want to be efficient in how we go about that process so that we have meaningful results for our students. On page 24 of the report, it's right in the middle of the page. It says the department and the state board are committed to educational equity in North Carolina, and this is the equity section of the report. There's not an express definition of what educational equity is there, and I believe obviously the board has spent a lot of time on that, and I know the department has spent a lot of time on that. Some form of expression about what is intended by educational equity is perceived by board members as to be something that would be helpful, or at least some board members. On the page 26, and I only have a couple more to go, and I'm trying to go as quickly as I can. On page 26, there's mention of the DRIVE Task Force and the NC STRIDE Task Force as important components. There's not express reference of the human capital roundtable that's done, that actually includes discussion of both those, the NC STRIDE Task Force and DRIVE Task Force. And the question that's come up from board members is, should there not be a more direct commentary about application of work being done by the NC Roundtable, the Human Capital Roundtable, excuse me, which includes support for some of the specific items that are listed there. So that's another area that I think the board has some comments on. The bottom of page 26, there's comment about the whole child pilots, and the question's been raised, are we proposing, or should we be proposing, some expansion of the whole child pilots efforts as part of our plan? And so I would ask that be looked at. Are we simply going to continue to report on the successes we've had on the whole child pilots, and we've had a number of excellent reports from local districts, or are we going to be able to expand upon some of that and the lessons we've learned so far. And finally, on page 27, everyone will be thrilled to know the last one. There's reference to a competency-based assessment tool, and we've talked about that. Actually it says tools, and so I think it would be good to have some better definition of what we're referring to there. Are we really referring to tools? Are we referring to a tool? What is the timeline for when something like that can be worked through? What would be the process? Perhaps not all that's required by the report, but that certainly would be a point that the board and the department can have some, I think, very fruitful ongoing discussions about in terms of how to best accomplish those things. So I will now be quiet and ask if other members, if your point has not already been covered, are there other points that other members of our board have with respect to this document, and ask for consideration and further revisions or comments as you finalize the report. And as I go there, I do want to say the report reflects a great deal of excellent work by staff members who've been working very hard. And I want to express on behalf of the entirety of the board, thank you very much for the efforts that have been going into this, because they are most significant. And I want people to realize and understand that.
Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
This is Michael Marr. If I could just
respond
quickly,
yes.
And before we get any additional questions. So I'm here outside of Carver Middle School in Scotland County. So if I lose you, I'm currently visiting summer schools and actually meeting with Scotland County to work with them on some strategic planning around their ESSER 3 funding. But very quickly, so I have had conversations with accountability and other data folks inside of DPI, and we are having conversations about the dashboard that you referenced. It's less a dashboard and more of just a display, but we will look to integrate that with other data. The other piece, I will certainly look at all of the comments that get submitted and then work to incorporate the feedback that you've noted. If there are any specific policy pieces, if someone could bring that to my attention as well, that would be helpful. And then additionally, as we talked about some of the diagnostics, some of these other pieces, of course, all of this is predicated on the General Assembly's allocation of our 10% holdback. And certainly watching that the House PCS has given me a little bit of heartache in looking at that and seeing how the General Assembly is looking at appropriating that funding. If it is appropriated that way, we can't hardly do any of these things that we're putting in this plan. So there is a little bit of concern on my part as we think about going forward and being really strategic around these funds in terms of how the money gets appropriated. But certainly the other piece of work that is ongoing and will drive a lot of what we ultimately end up doing is around benchmarking. And so, like I said, I've been meeting with the data folks inside the building. We've been trying to capture as many benchmarks, and I'll add the discipline data. That was not on my radar. I'll certainly get it on there. If there are any other pieces, we'll certainly add those as well. And lastly, so it is important to note that this report it is required by the Department of Ed. We're not looking at this as the comprehensive ESSER plan for North Carolina. I have a different document that we've been working on as a team, and I'm going to present that at the next board meeting, which is just in a couple of weeks, I believe. And so you'll have full access to that document. You can see some of our longer term strategic planning inside of that document.
Yes. Well, thank you for those comments, and thank you for the concern you expressed with respect to whether or not we can accomplish what we need to do as set out in the report, and will be further set out in the July report, consistent with the pending legislation. But I think, if anything, that highlights the significance of the very hard work you and your colleagues in the department have put in this, which is we have highly accomplished professional educators who are trying to give their best thoughts on how we can help our children. That work is invaluable, and I think it's important that we support it and get it there for public examination and review. And so that wouldn't have happened without your leadership and the hard work of so many of your colleagues. So thank you very much for that. It's a place to stop and say that. And I hope it will be recognized for the great efforts that it represents, and that some action will occur consistent with it as we go forward. Other comments by board members or questions by board members? I want to make sure to get those in as quickly as we can. All right, not hearing any. Thank you very much, again, for the great work that's gone into this.
Excuse me,
brings
Vice
us-
Chair. Vice Chair Duncan, I guess I have a point of clarity. So I've noted all of the changes that you have recommended. How would you like those presented to you so that we're able to move forward with our submission to USED?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. I think given the time limitations that we're under and you have to move quickly and we will not be able to meet again, I think we would ask that modifications be appropriately considered with respect to the suggestions and comments made. My understanding is, as was said a moment ago, the document is flexible. Long-term, there can be some changes made. So if the comments and modifications that have come from board members can be worked in, and not every one of them called for a change in the document.
Okay. So
But
I guess
several
what you
did.
can expect from me is to make the modifications where possible, and then I will provide a document that shows the original language with the change language, and then I will send that to Dr. Townsend Smith to be sent out with a Friday update, if that would be okay.
Yeah, that would be the best and most feasible way for us to do it under the time constraints that we have. So thank you for saying that, Dr. Townsend.
Thank you.
That brings us into Biz Op 3, which is lap salary use approval. This is something that hasn't come to us exactly in this form in the past. I'm grateful that it is. And this represents the last fiscal year for use of lap salary approval. Without calling on Superintendent Truitt, I suspect that her thoughts going forward would be not necessarily that this is the way it would be done, but it's important that we approve what we have before us for now and then think ahead proactively about use of lap salary in the future, which is something the board has expressed interest in the past. So with that, Ms. Schaus, let me let you go through the primary items here.
Thank you, and good morning. Yes, the GOVR 007 does require that the department receive approval for the use of lap salaries over 100,000. I do have one item that is less than 100,000. It's really for your information. And so these are the list of major items that we are requesting approval to use lap salary. For those that are not aware, lap salary are funds that are generated based on due to vacancies in positions. And it is a normal occurrence to have lap salaries. The state budget office does permit us to budget up to 50% of that anticipated lap salary. As I noted in this document, our lap salary amounts are significantly lower in this current fiscal year, just the total amount, than in, like, say, 2 years ago, and obviously due to the positions being filled. But the items that you have before you in this summary, there is the DIT billing. This is what it is. The Department of Information Technology bills DPI, and historically this has not been budgeted within the regular budget, and it has been funded from our indirect cost and lap salaries. The second item is Qualtrics. That is the item that is under the threshold of 100,000 that the board requires approval, but it is an information item there that it is a significant amount that was this is a partial of that cost that is being funded from lap salaries, and going forward we do anticipate building that into the recurring operating budget. Epicenter should be familiar to all of you. This is the data and records management system that is used by the Office of Charter Schools to manage all the documents that come in from charter schools. This has been requested as an expansion item going forward, so we do hope that this will not be necessary to be funded from lap salaries on an ongoing basis. Quality Matters is an item from NCVPS that is that looks at the courses for NCVPS per the SB requirement. They have a large amount that was being reviewed, and so the costs were significant upfront costs that we're requesting be covered from lap salaries. Their budget cannot absorb these types of costs. Going forward, they will have recurring costs associated with new courses and recertifications. And we will have to review our budgetary process going forward to see how those funds will be covered, those expenditures will be covered going forward. And then finally, an item which was brought up in the presentation I did in this most recent state board meeting. It is the indirect cost replacement. As I stated at that time, the federal government does review our indirect and approves our indirect cost rate. And the amount was 13.9% in prior year. When we received the final notification of our indirect cost rate, it was set at 9.3%, and we were notified late in the year in March or April timeframe, and that reduction was retroactive to July 1. So we really did not have, we don't have a position to be able to modify our budgets at this late time to cover that shortage. Going forward, we do anticipate that there will be a shortage. We will have an ability to charge our ESSA grants for indirect cost. And so that should absorb some of it, but that will be a challenge going forward to cover that shortage. It is an unusual item to be covered from lap salaries. There are restrictions as to the allowable use of lap salaries. We did get prior approval from OSBM for this one-time use of our lap salaries to cover that shortage.
Thank you for that report, and thank you for the work that went into compiling this. Are there any questions or comments on this item? All right, not receiving any, will be asked to vote to approve this for the usage of the lap salary funds. And that concludes our report, Chair Davis, and I apologize for the length, but we tried to go as quickly as we could.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan, and thanks to the BizOp and our staff team for the good work. Next, we turn to the SLA committee, and I want to thank that committee as well as Superintendent Truitt, DPI staff, and all of those who contributed to the development of the social studies supporting documents before us today. We remain committed to complying with state law as it stands today, which requires that we implement these standards and associated course changes in August 2021. We do not seek a delay in their implementation. But before us today, with recommendation for approval from our superintendent and DPI staff are the K-12 social studies supporting documents along with K-5 unpacking documents. We anticipate having before us in our July meeting the grades 6 through 12 unpacking documents. With that, we'll turn to the Student Learning and Achievement Committee chaired by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I share the responsibility for the work of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Let us study the past such that all students can celebrate our achievements towards a more perfect union, while acknowledging that the sins of the past still linger in the everyday lives of many. Let us study the past so we can understand where it might lead us today. Those are the closing words of the preamble to the social studies standards approved by this board in February. Those words apply as well to all of the documents we are considering today, which include the glossary, the strand maps, the crosswalks, and the K-5 unpacking documents. The approved standards have been available to our districts for almost 5 months. The changes to high school courses have been known for several years. Graduation requirements have been revised for the 2021 entering freshman class. Complex high school schedules have been built, teachers have been hired to teach specific courses, and students have been assigned to those classes. As helpful as these supporting documents will be to our teachers going forward, we know that they are not required to use them. And we can be sure that our districts have not been idle while waiting for our hardworking social studies team to get this work done. Finally, and most importantly, our students are eager for the opportunity to celebrate our achievements while exploring the effects of the past. We have to move forward now. As we asked, thorough citation of sources has been added to the glossary. Working closely with Superintendent Truitt, the staff did a final review of all the documents being presented today. And so I will turn it over to Dr. Stegall and Dr. Mullenix for a brief presentation of the work that's been ongoing over the last couple of weeks.
Good morning. Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. On behalf of Dr. David Stegall, Dr. Lori Major Carlin, Dr. Christy Day, and the Social Studies consultants, I bring before you the K-12 Social Studies supporting documents that include the glossary of instructional terms, strand maps, crosswalk, and K-5 unpacking documents. Earlier this month, we discussed the process for standards revision, highlighting that we are currently in phase 3, which is installation. During this phase, we have been writing the supporting documents. Once again, as a reminder, we are bringing forward the K-5 unpacking documents, glossary of instructional terms, strand maps, and crosswalk today. And then in July, we are projected to bring forward the 6 through 12 unpacking documents. As you see on the graphic, after the installation phase, we'll transition to phase 4, which is implementation, and that is set for the fall. To highlight, as we did earlier this month, we had a great amount of stakeholder involvement in the writing of these documents. This effort was inclusive of teachers, DPI social studies consultants, DPI leadership to include our state superintendent, internal DPI staff from outside of the Standards Curriculum and Instruction Division, and our State Teacher of the Year. Our State Superintendent, Teacher of the Year, and 2 division directors worked to revise the glossary. You'll see a snapshot of the glossary on your screen. All definitions within the glossary have in-text citations, and those references can also be found at the end of the glossary in the works cited. As discussed, the strand maps are also presented before you today. On these documents, anywhere a term from the glossary of instructional terms was defined, on these documents, the definition has been updated to be reflective of those terms in the current glossary we bring before you today. The strand map outlines the vertical progression of the objectives written to the history strand of each course in the K-12 North Carolina Standard Course of Study. Also, we have the crosswalk, which will assist educators in the preliminary work required in assessing the differences and similarities in the scope, content, concepts, and skill. The crosswalk is not intended to answer all questions about the nuances of the new standards versus the old standards. While valuable as a reference tool, this crosswalk does not substitute for a more deeper, comprehensive understanding of the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. There are crosswalks provided for every grade or specific course. And finally, the unpacking documents are designed to enhance teacher understanding of how to engage with the standards and objectives. As you see, the unpacking for each grade level provides the standards, overarching concepts, and objectives, as well as columns for mastery of the objective. Students will understand, students will know, example topics, and examples of formative assessment. Additionally, the glossary of instructional terms is linked on the title page of each unpacking document. To conclude today, I'll reiterate that we are requesting the approval of the K-12 glossary of instructional terms, strand maps, crosswalk, and K-5 unpacking documents. And I'll pause for any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mullenix. Before I open the floor for questions, Superintendent Truitt, is there anything you'd like to add to that presentation?
Thank you for your introduction, Ms. Kamnitz, to this agenda item. And in the interest of time, I will leave it with that.
Does the recommendation come with your, are you concurring with the recommendation of the staff for approval?
Absolutely, I am concurring. I have personally viewed every single page of what is being presented today, and am entirely satisfied with the work that's been done. And I would like to thank Maureen Stover for immediately jumping in and offering to help and executing on that offer in writing the glossary alongside my colleagues and me.
Thank you. Superintendent Truitt. So questions from colleagues, but again, and unfortunately, I know we're all aware we're on a very tight time frame here, so please be as succinct in your comments as you possibly can. Questions?
Yes, Ms. Kamnitz, this is Olivia. I do
Yes,
have
Dr.
a
Oxendine.
couple of questions, and I will, my effort is to be succinct and clear. I would like to know, I know this is very in-depth work, and the processes have been explained and re-explained to us on a number of times. But a point again about the process. I'm wondering, and I'm going to reference a particular standard in the fifth grade, that is, and it's within the unpacking document. So my question is related to a standard and in the unpacking document that has to do with the recognition of the achievements of women, minorities, marginalized groups, their achievements and contributions to change and innovation. So let me connect that to my question. My question is, what processes are in place, mechanisms in place, when stakeholders are around the table and they are coming up with example topics, example words, example formative assessments to ensure, I suppose I'm asking about, are there criteria for determining examples, names of individuals, historical individuals, formative assessments, so on and so forth? I'm interested in the criteria by which the stakeholders, the teachers, the experts within the building, when you are formulating and building these documents, what criteria do you use to decide on examples? And I will point to the omission, and I know we cannot think of every person in history, every event in history, every major theme in history, but I cannot, for the life of me, understand how in this particular standard within the unpacking documents, how we missed Sandra Day O'Connor, the first female to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court, appointed by President Ronald Reagan in 1981. I don't know how we missed that historical figure in this particular segment of the unpacking documents. While I'm not looking for an answer, because my question is more rhetorical and it's more about taking my suggestion under advisement for future purposes, I would like to know, and I hope we do establish criteria so that we do not miss the example that I'm raising at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. And before I turn to the staff for a response, I would say that some of what you just outlined, I think, is in the purview of our local districts. But Dr. Mullenix or anyone on the staff, any other response to Dr. Oxendine's concerns?
May I, Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes, please, Superintendent.
You read my mind. I think that the most significant way that we ensure that that various groups or people are not left out is that we are leaving it in the hands of our teachers to determine what they're going to do. That's why there's a disclaimer on the document that says this is not meant to be a checklist of people to cover. The purpose of providing examples is to ensure that teachers have that the examples provide a frame of reference for choosing examples. And so someone may very well look at that list and say, oh, I understand. Sandra Day O'Connor would fit perfectly in the lesson that I'm going to choose.
Ms. Kamnitz, I want to follow up on that response.
Go ahead, Dr. Oxendine, quickly so that we can have some room for other comments as
I am
well.
going to go back to a previous discussion raised by my colleague, well-respected colleague, Mr. Ford. This goes back to last summer when he rightfully raised the issue of sometimes, many times, we can't depend on locals to think of everything. Every example, every name, every event in history. Some things in the state documents at the state level, because the state level forms the guides, the exemplifies, and sends the message to the districts. These names, these places, these events in history are so important that they appear in our state adopted documents. So I understand the role of locals. I understand flexibility, choice, giving the districts full latitude to further develop. But I will double down on my point. Some places, names, events, personalities in history warrant, especially of the magnitude of Sandra Day O'Connor. That is significant. That is significant. And it is so significant. It rises to the level of appearing in these documents that the state board is about to adopt.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Other comments from board members?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Hall.
Thank you. And I congratulate the team for putting this document together. I got a broad question, I think. That's broad to me. When a classroom teacher, and I'm thinking about that teacher in the classroom, a question is raised from one of the students dealing with discrimination, gender, racism. Is that teacher permitted to explore deeper into that request coming from that particular student during the instructional period? Or are they held to a higher standard of not touching on those issues? I was in the classroom, just like a lot of us. Today is different than what it was then. But I want them to feel free, not to be enclosed or fearful of touching on some of these issues. I just need to know, do they have that option at that time, at that point, to dig deeper into the discussion, especially as it gets into the middle schools and high schools? Help me there. I've had sleepless nights after reading. Help somebody. And almost you, Dr. Truitt, I don't know whom, but I need to hear something. Well, I have some people that's asking me. And right now I can't answer.
Thank you. I'm suspecting perhaps one of our council, maybe that I'm not sure who's the right person to answer that question.
May I start?
Yeah.
Superintendent Truitt.
Yeah, thank you. So what I would say to you, Mr. Hall, is that there is nothing in any of the documents that you're looking at today that would prevent a teacher from delving into any topic that he or she felt was necessary for a closer look. Absolutely nothing. We are not dictating the amount of time a teacher can spend on something. We are not dictating the resources that they choose. We're not even dictating the topics that they use to address the standards. We are merely suggesting that these topics fulfill the teaching of this standard. Teachers are not bound to use these documents at all. They don't even need to open the document. I mean, I suppose a principal could or a PLC could require its members to use the documents in formulating lesson plans, but there's certainly no law or policy that requires teachers to use these documents.
Thank you so much, Dr. Superintendent, for sharing that with me. And I need to close, I don't say that much, so give me 2 minutes. Madam Chair, if you would. I just want to say
Quickly as
this.
you can.
I understand exactly where Dr. Oxendine is coming from about historical figures and how to identify and not leaving out people regardless of gender, color, or anything. There should be a process. And yes, we can identify everybody, but Sandra Day O'Connor, I agree totally. And there are others who are first. So I just want to put that in there. I understand where she's coming from, and I support her stance on that particular issue. And thank you so much for giving me the time to talk. Thank you, Dr. Superintendent, for explaining that to me. And believe me, I would tell my cohorts, let's get to work. School is opening. We can't wait. I mean, a year-round schooling is already in place as we look at preparing for the upcoming year. And I know the documents are year out, but I'm ready.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Other questions from my colleagues?
Ms. Chemnitz, I know everybody's tired of listening to Olivia, but I will not be happy until I say this, okay? In our unpacking document, still 5th grade, understand the ways in which the federal government has protected individual rights of citizens. This goes to my point about we need criteria for developing. A 5th grader would benefit so much from learning that about the rights of the disabled. Wouldn't it be wonderful if our documents included the advocacy of citizens and parents that led to Public Law 94-142, the beginning of special education programs resulting from free, appropriate public education in this country? I could teach forever this particular standard around the rights of our individuals with disabilities. Also, the rights of our veterans that could be built into this part of the unpacking documents. So when we say has protected individual rights of citizens, the document, I'm sorry, isn't expansive enough. And I will be quiet on that point.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. And I think you're illustrating the richness of possibilities that lie within these documents. And I hear your frustration, but I think our teachers will uncover those stories to tell and talk with their students about. Yes, I hear someone else wanting to speak.
It's Catherine.
Go ahead.
So I want to
Go
be
ahead.
I want to be clear with the board that the fact of these documents, the specificity of these documents is not in board policy. What is in board policy is simply a statement that says that the board will direct the department to draft the standards and any other documents it deems necessary to support those standards. And so if the board wants to have a further conversation about what the purpose of these documents are, I think that is in order. But as it stands, the purpose of these documents is not to uphold one topic over another or to highlight one idea over another. It is not to place a value judgment on this is more important than this or is as important as this. I think it's kind of common sense that it should provide, if the standard says diverse or calls for says something like religious groups, governments, secular groups, then those topics need to be covered. But I think that what I'm hearing calls for further discussion down the road about what the purpose should be of these documents, and then we can have a conversation about how criteria should be developed.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. That's very helpful. We are just about out of time. Maybe one other comment or question if it's something that we haven't discussed yet, but please very quickly. Hearing none, then, Mr. Chair, I will return to you.
Chair Davis, are you there?
Excuse me, sorry. I unmute. So thank you, Ms. Kamnitz, and to the SLA committee and staff, our superintendent. We will consider this item separately on our action agenda in just a few minutes. We'll now move to our final committee of the day, the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, chaired by Ms. Amy White. Ms. White.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Good morning, everyone. This is Amy White, and I need to turn my camera on. It's a pleasure to join you today. We have one item on our agenda. This is a request from Bridges Academy, which is a charter school in Wilkes County. And with great sadness, the Board of Directors of Bridges Academy has announced its decision to relinquish that charter. And so that decision is before us today. It has been previously recommended by the Charter School Advisory Board. I will turn to Mr. Dave Machado to walk us through this particular request.
Thank you, Ms. White. This is a charter school that was established in 1998. It's a K-8 school in Wilkes County, population of approximately 150 to 160 students. Because of some financial difficulty, they feel like they are not able to keep the school open, so they are asking, they are voluntarily relinquishing their charter. And CSAB did unanimously vote to make this recommendation to the State Board of Ed at their last meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Machado. Board members, do you have any questions about Bridges Academy and its decision to request a relinquishment of its charter? Hearing and seeing none, then I will turn the table back over to the chair. Our recommendation will be from the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee that we approve this request. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. White. Colleagues, that concludes our committee work for the day. We'll move to our action agenda. And the first motion will be to approve BizOp 1 through 3 and EICS 1 as presented in this meeting. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
The motion, Mr. Chairman.
I believe the motion was made by
Wendell Hall.
Kamnitz. Excuse me, Mr. Hall.
That's okay.
Motion by Mr. Hall. Is there a second?
Second, Ms. Kamnitz.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Kamnitz. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell, Lieutenant Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. Our final item for today is the SLA 1 and the recommendation is to approve the materials as presented. Is there a motion to that effect?
Move.
Motion by Mr. Ford. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hall. Any discussion on this motion? Dr. Tipton Rogers, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine,
No.
Ms. Chemnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
No.
Mr. Chasteen,
No.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell, Lieutenant Governor, Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. So the motion carries.
Yes, sir.
Colleagues, that concludes our work for the day. Now request a motion to adjourn.
Mrs. White, move to adjourn.
Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hall. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Chasteen,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell, Lieutenant Governor, Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. We're adjourned. Have a good day.
Thank you.
See you later.